The evening sun was still visible over the horizon when chaos erupted. Bayo Ajayi, the notorious cocoa farmer and self-proclaimed king of charm, came tumbling out of his house like a man possessed. But this wasn't his usual swagger. No, this was something else entirely. He was somersaulting. Not the graceful kind you'd see at a circus, but the wild, uncontrollable kind that made him look like a yam in a frying pan. "Please help. Somebody help," Toby Ishala screamed, running after him in her wrapper, which was threatening to unravel with every frantic step. Her voice was a mix of panic and guilt, like someone who had just realized they'd put salt in the tea instead of sugar. "Please stop him. He's going to kill himself." Bayo, meanwhile, was too busy flipping through the air like a poorly thrown coin to respond. His arms flailed, his legs kicked, and his face was a mask of sheer terror. The villagers who had been going about their morning routines stopped in their tracks. Children dropped their bowls of pap, market women abandoned their stalls, and even the goats paused mid-chew to watch the spectacle. "Wow, what's happening?" Mama Nkechi, the village gossip, shouted, her hands on her hips. "Has Bayo become an acrobat overnight? Please hold him," Toby pleaded, her voice cracking. But no one moved. They were too busy laughing, pointing, and recording the scene on their phones. After all, when was the last time they'd seen a grown man somersaulting down the street like a human wheel? Bayo somersaulted past Mr. John's kiosk, knocking over a stack of Guinness bottles. "High drinks," Mr. John wailed, but even he couldn't suppress a chuckle as Bayo flipped past him like a runaway tire. "Toby, what have you done to this man?" Mama Nkechi asked, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "This is not ordinary." Toby didn't answer. She was too busy trying to catch Bayo, who was now heading straight for the village square. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind raced with thoughts of what her husband Jide would say if he found out. But there was no time to think. Bayo was picking up speed and the crowd was growing larger by the second. "Somebody please," Toby begged, tears streaming down her face. But the villagers were too busy enjoying the show to intervene. Bayo, the man who had always been in control, was now at the mercy of forces he couldn't understand. And Toby, the woman who had always been the life of the party, was now the center of a scandal she couldn't escape. By the time Bayo reached the village square, his somersaulting had taken on a life of its own. He was no longer just flipping, he was spinning, twisting, and even bouncing off the ground like a rubber ball. The crowd, now numbering in the dozens, followed him like spectators at a wrestling match, cheering and laughing with every flip. "Bayo, you won't kill yourself," someone shouted. "Leave him to display for us," another person replied. "This is karma catching up with him." Toby, meanwhile, was on the verge of collapse. Her wrapper had come undone, revealing the lace slip she'd worn for her secret meeting with Bayo. She tried to cover herself, but it was no use. The damage had been done. Her secret was out and the whole village knew it. "Toby, what did you do to this man?" Mama Nkechi asked again, this time with a knowing smirk. "You won't kill people with your beauty." Toby ignored her and made one last desperate attempt to stop Bayo. She lunged at him, grabbing his arm as he flipped past her. But the force of his somersaulting was too strong, and she was sent sprawling to the ground. Her knees scraped against the rough gravel, and her heart sank as she realized there was nothing she could do. It was then that the village elders arrived. Led by Pa Adabir, the oldest and wisest man in the village, they pushed their way through the crowd, their faces stern and their walking sticks tapping against the ground like a drumbeat. "Give way," Pa Adibir commanded, his voice booming like thunder. "This is not a film show." The crowd parted and the elders approached Bayo, who was now somersaulting in circles like a broken toy. Pa Adibir studied him for a moment, then turned to Toby with a look of disapproval. "Toby," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment, "why have you brought the thunderbolt curse to our village?" Toby's heart skipped a beat. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. The elders exchanged knowing glances and the crowd fell silent. The laughter was gone, replaced by a sense of unease. Something was very wrong and everyone knew it. Bayo Ajayi's return to the village was nothing short of a spectacle. He arrived in a shiny black SUV, the kind that made the village boys stop playing football just to stare. The car's windows were tinted so dark that no one could see inside, but everyone knew who it was. Bayo had always had a flair for the dramatic, and his return was no exception. As he stepped out of the car, the villagers gasped. Gone was the scrawny boy who had left the village years ago. In his place stood a man who looked like he'd just walked out of a Nollywood movie. His crisp white agbada sparkled in the sunlight, his gold wristwatch gleamed, and his shoes were so polished you could see your reflection in them. Even his smile seemed to shine brighter than the sun. "Bayo, welcome," the villagers chorused, rushing to greet him. Thank you, Bayo replied, waving like a politician on campaign. "It's good to be back." The women giggled and whispered among themselves, while the men shook his hand and slapped his back like he was a long-lost brother. Bayo basked in the attention, his chest puffed out like a rooster in a henhouse. He had worked hard to build his wealth in the city, and now he was ready to enjoy the fruits of his labor. But not everyone was impressed. Mama Nkechi, the village gossip, watched from a distance, her arms crossed and her lips pursed. She muttered to no one in particular. "This man has come back with his expensive clothes and flashy car. We will see how long he will last." Bayo, of course, was oblivious to her skepticism. He was too busy enjoying the adoration of the crowd. As he made his way to his family compound, he couldn't help but notice the admiring glances from the women. Some of them were bold enough to wink at him, while others simply stared with open mouths. Bayo smiled to himself. He was back and he was ready to make his mark. But there was one woman who caught his eye more than the others. Toby Ishala. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, her head held high and her eyes sparkling with mischief. Bayo had heard about her before. Everyone had. She was the most beautiful woman in the village, with a smile that could light up a room and a laugh that sounded like music. But she was also married, and her husband, Jide, was one of the most respected men in the village. Bayo didn't care. He had always loved a challenge, and Toby was the ultimate prize. As their eyes met, he flashed her his most charming smile. Toby raised an eyebrow, then turned and walked away, her hips swaying like palm trees in the wind. Bayo watched her go, a slow smile spreading across his face. This was going to be fun. Toby Ishala was bored. She had been bored for months, maybe even years. Her life was comfortable, yes, but it was also predictable. Every morning she woke up, cooked breakfast for Jide, cleaned the house, and then spent the rest of the day doing nothing. Jide was always busy with his work as a goldsmith, and when he wasn't working he was too tired to do anything but sleep. Toby loved her husband, but she couldn't help feeling like something was missing. She missed the excitement of her youth, the thrill of being pursued by handsome men, the feeling of being alive. Jide was a good man, but he was also boring. He didn't take her out, he didn't buy her gifts, and he certainly didn't make her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. So when Bayo returned to the village, Toby couldn't help but be intrigued. She had heard the stories about him, how he was rich, charming, and irresistible to women. She had seen the way he looked at her, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long. And she had felt a spark of excitement that she hadn't felt in years. But Toby wasn't stupid. She knew the risks of getting involved with a man like Bayo. She knew the gossip it would cause, the damage it could do to her marriage. But the more she thought about it, the more she felt alive. After all, what was life without a little excitement? One evening, as she was walking home from the market, Bayo appeared out of nowhere. "Good evening, Toby," he said, his voice smooth as honey. Toby stopped in her tracks, her heart racing. "Good evening, Bayo," she replied, trying to sound casual. Bayo smiled, his teeth gleaming in the moonlight. "You look beautiful tonight." Toby felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, looking down at her feet. Bayo stepped closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You know, Toby, I've been thinking about you ever since I came back to the village." Toby's breath caught in her throat. "Oh," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Bayo nodded. "You're different from the other women here. You're special." Toby didn't know what to say. She knew she should walk away, but her feet seemed rooted to the spot. Bayo reached out and gently touched her arm, sending a shiver down her spine. "Meet me tomorrow night," he said, his voice low and urgent. "At my house. I want to get to know you better." Toby hesitated. She knew this was wrong. The thought of spending an evening with Bayo was tempting enough for any woman to lose herself. But she wasn't just any woman. She was the wife of a respectable man in the village. "In your dreams," she managed to respond, unable to hide her delight in the flirty encounter. Bayo smiled, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "I'll dream of you then." As Toby walked home, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions. She felt excited, she felt alive. She loved the way Bayo looked at her, the way he made her feel desired. And for the first time in a long time, that was all she wanted. One night, the village gathered for their annual New Yam festival. Drums pounded, feet stomped, and laughter filled the air as the villagers celebrated another bountiful harvest season. The aroma of roasted meat and freshly pounded yam wafted through the air, making everyone's stomachs growl in anticipation. Women swayed in colorful wrappers, men clinked glasses of palm wine, and children darted between legs, chasing each other with sticks. Bayo Ajayi, dressed in a flowing agbada that shimmered like liquid gold, was the center of attention. He moved through the crowd like a king, shaking hands, cracking jokes, and flashing his trademark smile. But his eyes kept drifting to one person, Toby Ajayi. Toby was seated at a table with a group of women, her laughter ringing out like a bell. She wore a fitted Ankara dress that hugged her curves perfectly, and her hair was styled in intricate braids that cascaded down her back. Bayo couldn't take his eyes off her. "Bayo, won't you eat anything?" Mama Nkechi called out, holding up a plate of jollof rice. "This food will be gone if you don't eat it now." "I'm coming, Mama Nkechi," Bayo replied, but his feet carried him in the opposite direction, straight toward Toby. Toby looked up as he approached, her eyes narrowing playfully. "Bayo, what brings you here?" Bayo grinned, pulling up a chair beside her. "I just came to admire the most beautiful woman in the village." The women around the table giggled, but Toby rolled her eyes. "Bayo, you and your sweet mouth. You think I don't know your type?" "I type?" Bayo feigned innocence. "What type is that?" "The type that goes out of his way to tell a woman sweet things until she falls for you, only to disappear after you get what you want." Bayo laughed, leaning closer. "Toby, you know me too well. But that's all in the past. I'm a changed man now and I'm here to stay." Toby raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching with a suppressed smile. "We shall see." As the night wore on, Bayo and Toby's banter grew more flirtatious. They danced together, their bodies moving in sync to the rhythm of the drums. Toby felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, but a voice in the back of her mind whispered warnings. What about Jide? What about her marriage? But Bayo's charm was hard to resist. By the time the festival ended, Toby was torn between her loyalty to Jide and her growing attraction to Bayo. As she walked home, her heart raced with excitement and guilt. She knew she was playing with fire, but the warmth of the flames was too enticing to ignore. The first time Bayo and Toby met in secret, it was at his house. Toby had told Jide she was visiting a friend, but the lie tasted bitter on her tongue. Still, the thrill of sneaking around was intoxicating. Bayo's house was as extravagant as the man himself. The living room was filled with plush furniture, expensive artwork, and a giant flat-screen TV that seemed out of place in the village. But Toby barely noticed any of it. Her attention was focused entirely on Bayo. "You look even more beautiful up close," Bayo said, pouring her a glass of wine. Toby took the glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Bayo, you know this is wrong, right?" Bayo sat beside her, his eyes locking onto hers. "What's wrong is denying ourselves happiness. You deserve to feel alive, Toby. And I can give you that." Toby's resolve wavered. She took a sip of the wine, the rich flavor calming her nerves. "What if someone finds out?" Bayo chuckled. "Nobody will find out. We're both adults. We know how to be discreet." Toby wanted to believe him, but the guilt gnawed at her. Still, when Bayo leaned in and kissed her, all her doubts melted away. For the first time in years, she felt desired, cherished, and alive. Their affair escalated quickly. They met in secret whenever they could, stealing moments of passion whenever Jide was at work. Toby's guilt never fully disappeared, but it was overshadowed by the excitement of being with Bayo. He felt like a teenager again, sneaking around and breaking the rules. But Bayo saw things differently. To him, Toby was just another conquest, another notch on his belt. He enjoyed the thrill of the chase, but he didn't think about the consequences. He didn't realize that he was playing with forces far beyond his control. Toby's husband, Jide Ajayi, was a man of few words, but his hands spoke volumes. As a goldsmith, he spent hours hunched over his workbench, shaping gold into intricate designs that left his customers in awe. His workshop was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in his craft and forget about the troubles of the world. But lately, even his work couldn't distract him from the growing distance between him and Toby. He had noticed the changes in her behavior a few months after Bayer's return to the village. The way she seemed distracted, the way she spent more time getting dressed, the way she always wanted to go to the market in the evening or visit her friends for no reason. Jide wasn't a jealous man, but he wasn't blind either. Something was going on and he didn't like it. One evening, as he was locking up his workshop, Jide decided to confront Toby. He found her in the kitchen, humming to herself as she stirred a pot of soup. "Toby," he said, his voice calm but firm. Toby looked up, startled. "Yes, Jide?" Jide took a deep breath. "Is everything okay?" Toby frowned. "Of course. Why wouldn't it be?" Jide hesitated. He didn't want to accuse her of anything, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. "I've just noticed that you've been different lately." Tobias' eyes narrowed. "Different how?" Jide shrugged. "I don't know. You just seem distracted." Toby turned back to the pot, her shoulders tense. "I'm fine, Jide. You're just imagining things." Jide wanted to believe her, but something in her tone made him doubt. He decided to let it go for now, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As he lay in bed that night, Jide's mind raced. He thought about the stories he had heard about Bayo, the way the women in the village fawned over him. He thought about the way Toby had been acting, the way she seemed to light up whenever Bayo's name was mentioned. And he thought about the traditions of his people, the ancient practices that had been passed down from generation to generation. Jide wasn't a superstitious man, but he knew the power of tradition. And he knew that if Toby was indeed involved with Bayo, there would be consequences. He just hoped it wouldn't come to that. Jide was a man of patience, but even his patience had limits. A few weeks after he first confronted Toby, he had noticed glaring changes in her behavior. She was spending more time on her phone, smiling at the screen like it held the secrets of the universe. She was dressing up more, wearing perfume even when she wasn't going anywhere. And she was staying out late, claiming she was visiting friends. Jide tried, but he couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in his gut. "Toby," he called out as she walked past the door one evening. Toby stopped, her heart skipping a beat. "Yes, Jide?" Jide set down his tools and wiped his hands on a cloth. "Where are you going?" Toby forced a smile. "Just to Mom and Ketchy's house. She needs help with something." Jide studied her face, searching for any sign of deception. "You've been going out a lot lately." Toby's smile faltered. "I'm just trying to help my friends." "Is that a crime?" Jide sighed. "No, it's not a crime. But I miss spending time with you." Toby's guilt flared up, but she pushed it down. "I'll be back soon, okay?" Jide nodded, but his eyes remained troubled. As Toby walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The breaking point came one evening when Jide found a love note tucked under Toby's pillow. It was written in Bayer's flamboyant handwriting, filled with sweet nothings and promises of forever. Jide's hands trembled as he read it, his heart breaking with every word. Up until this moment, he had always ignored his doubts with the fact that he had no evidence. But the love note he had just found was enough proof that his wife was having an affair. Jide's anger melted into sadness. He felt a deep sense of betrayal, but also a determination to set things right. As a man who was deeply rooted in the traditions and beliefs of his ancestors, he knew what he had to do. It was time to invoke the Thunderbolt curse. The ritual to invoke the Thunderbolt curse took place under the cover of darkness. Jide went to the sacred grove at the edge of the village, carrying the items he needed: a black hen, kola nuts, and a piece of cloth from Toby's wrapper. The air was thick with the scent of earth and incense, and the only sound was the chirping of crickets. Jide knelt before the ancient tree, his heart heavy but resolute. He placed the items on the ground and began to chant the incantation, his voice low and steady. "Spirits of our ancestors, hear my plea. Let justice be done. Let the one who has wronged me face the consequences of his actions. Let the Megan take hold." As he spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending a chill down his spine. Jide felt a surge of power, a connection to something greater than himself. He knew the ritual was working. When it was over, Jide stood up, his mind clear and his heart at peace. He had done what he had to do. Now it was up to the spirits to deliver justice. The village was quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm. The air was heavy, and the usual chatter of the market women and the laughter of children were absent. It was as if the village itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Bayo Ajayi, however, was oblivious to the tension. He was too busy planning his next rendezvous with Toby. They had been meeting in secret for a few months now, and Bayo was feeling invincible. He had no idea that his world was about to come crashing down. "Bayo, are you sure we won't regret this our affair?" Toby asked, her voice filled with unease. They were sitting in his living room, the TV playing softly in the background. Bayo laughed, his confidence unshaken. "Toby, relax. Nothing will happen as long as we're careful, okay?" Toby nodded, but her heart wasn't in it. She had been feeling a growing sense of unease, a nagging feeling that something was wrong. But every time she tried to bring it up, Bayo would brush it off with a joke or a kiss. "You worry too much," Bayo said, pulling her closer. "Everything is under control." Toby wanted to believe him, but the guilt was eating her alive. She thought about Jide, about the life they had built together, and wondered how it had come to this. But then Bayo kissed her and all her doubts melted away. Meanwhile, Jide was watching from a distance. He had been following Toby for days, his heart heavy with suspicion. He had seen the way she smiled at her phone, the way she dressed up even when she wasn't going anywhere. And now, as he watched her walk into Bayo's house, his heart sank with a feeling of betrayal. His heart raced with anger. He felt like going in and confronting Bayo, even possibly fighting with him, but he knew he had to be patient. He had invoked the thunderbolt curse, and now it was only a matter of time before the curse took effect. He just hoped it would be enough to teach them a lesson. The beautiful sunset punctuated the calm evening as the village seemed alive with activities. Bayo and Toby were in his bedroom, their passion igniting as they kissed and touched, lost in the moment. But as they began to consummate the affair, something strange happened. Bayo felt a sudden jolt like an electric shock, and before he knew it, he was somersaulting. He flipped off the bed and landed on the floor with a thud, his body moving uncontrollably. "Bayo, what's wrong with you?" Toby screamed, her voice filled with panic. Bayo didn't answer. He was too busy flipping through the air like a rag doll, his arms and legs flailing wildly. Toby tried to grab him, but the force of his somersaulting was too strong. She stumbled back, her heart racing with fear. "Help! Somebody help!" Toby shouted, running out of the room and into the street. "Bayo is somersaulting." The villagers, who had been going about their evening routines, stopped in their tracks. They watched in shock as Bayo came tumbling out of his house, his body spinning and twisting like a human wheel. What is this?" Mama Nkechi shouted, her hands on her hips. "Bayo has turned into an acrobat overnight?" The crowd grew larger, their laughter and gasps filling the air. Bayo somersaulted past Mr. John's kiosk, knocking over a stack of Guinness bottles. "High drinks," Mr. John wailed, but even he couldn't suppress a chuckle as Bayo flipped past him like a runaway tire. Toby chased after Bayo, her heart pounding in her chest. "Somebody please, help him." But no one moved. They were too busy enjoying the spectacle. Bayo, the man who had always been in control, was now at the mercy of forces he couldn't understand. And Toby, the woman who had always been the life of the party, was now the center of a scandal she couldn't escape. By the time Jide arrived on the scene, Bayo's somersaulting had taken on a life of its own. He was no longer just flipping, he was spinning, twisting, and even bouncing off the ground like a rubber ball. The crowd, now numbering in the dozens, followed him like spectators at a wrestling match, cheering and laughing with every flip. Bayo saw the crowd laughing and pointing at him, but he was too busy somersaulting to tell them off, his face a mask of sheer terror. The crowd fell silent, their laughter replaced by a sense of unease. Something was very wrong and everyone knew it. "Jide, did you do this?" Toby asked, her voice trembling. Jide turned to her, his eyes filled with disappointment. "Yes. I invoked the thunderbolt curse to punish Bayo and teach you a lesson." The crowd gasped, their whispers growing louder. "Thunderbolt? Is this how it works?" Someone muttered. "Jide, you won't kill people one day with your juju," Mama Nkechi said, her voice filled with awe. Jide ignored her and turned back to Bayo. "I will lift the curse, but only if you promise to leave this village and never return." Bayo nodded frantically, his body still flipping through the air. "I promise. Just make it stop." Jide took a deep breath and began to chant the incantation to lift the curse. As he spoke, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves and sending a chill down everyone's spine. When he was done, Bayo collapsed to the ground, his body finally still. Bayo was taken to his home, his body weak and his spirit broken. The villagers helped him inside, their laughter and whispers following him like a shadow. He knew he would never live this down, and the thought filled him with shame. Toby, meanwhile, returned home, her heart heavy with guilt. Jide was waiting for her, his face a mask of anger and sadness. "Toby," he said, his voice low and steady, "how could you do this to me?" Toby burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. "I'm sorry, Jide. I didn't mean to hurt you." Jide sighed, his heart aching with betrayal. "I trusted you, Toby. I loved you. But you broke that trust." Toby nodded, her tears falling freely. "I know. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Jide didn't answer. He just turned and walked away, leaving Toby alone with her guilt. The village buzzed with gossip about Bayo, Toby, and Jide. The story of the somersaulting curse spread like wildfire, and everyone had an opinion. Bayo finally met his match, Mama Nkechi said, her voice filled with satisfaction. "He's too much of a womanizer." Toby really disappointed everyone, another woman added. She couldn't respect her husband. The children, meanwhile, found endless amusement in mimicking Bayo's somersaulting. They would run through the streets, flipping and spinning, their laughter echoing through the village. Bayo became the subject of ridicule, his once charismatic persona reduced to a joke. He knew he couldn't stay in the village, not after what had happened. So one night he packed his bags and left, vowing never to return. Toby, meanwhile, was ostracized by some of the women in the village, while others pitied her. She knew she had made a mistake, but she also knew she had to live with the consequences. As for Jide, he was left to pick up the pieces of his broken marriage. He didn't know if he could ever forgive Toby, but he also knew he couldn't give up on her. They had been through too much together. The village, however, would never forget the day Bayo somersaulted through the streets. It was a story that would be told for generations, a cautionary tale about the dangers of infidelity and the power of tradition.